I wasn't around at the beginning of Ann Tyler's career. Well, I was alive, but I didn't work in publishing, and or Laurie Moore's career. And I didn't have a front row seat to the start of Ann Patchett's career. But watching and reading Emma Straub over the last several years, it is very easy to see the parallels. Book after book, Emma Straub is a writer who fans trust to give them the read that they crave. And knowing what I do about her new book, All Adults Here, I am all the more confident in saying this. Emma is not yet 40, but counting this new book, she's already the author of 4 novels, carving her a solid spot on the New York Times bestseller list. She's a book person through and through, as an author, as a ravenous reader, as an amazing bookstore owner. But I would say that just as much as a book person, she is a people person. She understands what makes people tick. She understands what makes families tick and what is the kernel of meaning at the heart of every human relationship and moment. And in her writing, she captures and conveys all of this in a way that immediately reverberates with readers and also quite often makes us laugh with recognition. She has this unsurpassed talent for subtly perfect humor. Her social observations are priceless, but even better is her ability to find the most unlikely and yet most exactly right metaphor for just about anything. And once you hear it, you think, yes, that is the absolutely only way that can ever be described ever again. Emma is going to tell you about her book in her own words, and I don't want to step on her toes. Instead, I'm going to steal the words of Philip Larkin. But I have no problem with cussing in front of everybody else, but I can't do it in front of librarians. So, but the first time I read this book, I immediately thought of those famous lines of Philip Larkin's. They F you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. So, to me, that is the subject of this book. The loving chaos and misguided intentions within a family, the fallout and the recovery. And she has 3 generations of, the mother becomes the grandmother, the children become the parents, the grandchildren suddenly become teenagers, and everybody is in different roles, and realizing the mistakes they made are sort of playing out in their new era. So it's a story about adult siblings, aging parents, high school boyfriends, middle school mean girls, the lifelong effects of birth order, and all the other things that follow us into adulthood, whether we like them to or not. Coming of age, as Emma Straub knows, isn't just for kids.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really nicer than anything anyone said at my wedding. And it's almost wine time, and you guys have been very patient, and so I'm going to talk fast. Okay. Hi, librarians. Okay, so I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories about my experience with libraries first, before I babble about my book. So the first one is one of the books that had truly the most profound effect on me as a girl learning how to be, what we now call a tween, was I found this book at a library. It was in fact at a library sale, which means that I got to buy it for $1 and take it home. And I think, you can tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I think it also means that the library did not want it anymore, which was shocking to me. The book was called Miss Piggy's Guide to Life, and it was presented as humor, but I took it deadly seriously, and still do. It was all about, as you might imagine, Miss Piggy's sort of anti-diet diet, where you order the salad, which is a good place to put the chocolate cake on top of, things like that, and exercising, which is bring one bonbon to your mouth, then another. And as a girl who was always the tallest and the biggest in the class, I genuinely took strength from this book, and I was like, yeah, she is powerful and beautiful and sexy, and she knows what she wants, and her little frog is devoted to her. That is what I want out of my life. So, yeah. And then the second thing about a library, is that, so my debut novel, Laura Lamont's Life in Pictures, was a historical book. It covered many, many years. It started, basically, it was like 1920 to 1980, and covered the Hollywood studio system. And I went to this special collections library run by the Academy of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles. And I showed up with my pencil, and it's the kind of library where you have to lock everything in a special compartment, and they give you special gloves to touch things. And I went to the library and I said, I'd like to learn about Hollywood, basically. And the librarian was like, okay, any particular period? And I said, well, 1920 to 1980. And she was so kind to me. She was like, well, do you want to narrow that down a little bit? She helped me, and I wrote a book. It was fine. Anyway, so my last novel, Modern Lovers, was published in 2016 when my younger son, Miles, was 3 months old. And the experience of publishing that book and touring while breastfeeding and pumping on airplanes and in Amtrak bathrooms. Pay no attention, my publicist in the back. It was fine, I loved it. Was so harrowing that I pushed back my deadline for my next book, thinking, okay, I just can't do that again for a long time. And this is going to be luxurious. I am going to take my time and write this next book. I'm going to have so much time. And then I did what any rational person would do, and I opened a bookstore. Because you have to have a degree to become a librarian. And I'm not that smart. But so my husband and I opened our bookstore, Books Are Magic, in 2017. I had already sold my next book to Riverhead, and in part because Jeff Klosky, my publisher, lives around the corner from the bookstore, and in fact helped me physically carry the bookshelves into the space. I knew that Riverhead would be supportive of my having another job, even if it was another job that required 100% of my time and brain power for much of the next year. But as I said, I had already sold this book, and so I knew something about it, which was that I thought it was about cheese. A novel about cheese that took place outside New York City, and that was it. That was all I knew. And for many months, I just worked on the bookstore and completely ignored the book. And running a bookstore is all-consuming. But in addition to consuming me, it also invigorated me. Being surrounded by new books, galleys, hardcovers, paperbacks, books on Edelweiss. And of course, as you all know, both libraries and bookstores are full of people to talk to all the time. All of that also made me long for my other job where I got to sit alone all day. So I did. So I finally did. I started abandoning my husband and the bookstore for a couple of days a week, and I slowly reintroduced myself to my novel. I knew that I wanted to write about a family because I always want to write about a family. And I knew that it took place in the Hudson Valley in New York. I knew that I wanted the Gilmore Girls. Novelists were supposed to be very serious, and we're not supposed to pay attention to other things. But really, if I'm being honest, one of the main inspirations behind this book was the Gilmore Girls. And I wanted Stars Hollow, and I wanted generations of women. That was really interesting to me. And specifically, I wanted to write about parenthood. I had started sending my older child to the school that I went to, which made me continues to make me feel, like I live inside a little museum of my own life, where I walk the same streets and I see the same faces. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like dropping your child off at preschool and bumping into a man who you had a sort of gross makeout session with when you were in high school, because boy became a man who became a father of another preschooler. So I was thinking a lot about what it means to be an adult in the same place as you were a teenager, and what it's like not to be able to totally shed your skin or to leave sort of previous versions of yourself behind. I think that, people often talk about small towns having that quality, but for me, my little corner of Brooklyn is that small town. So All Adults Here is a book that I could not have written before, which I think is always a good goal for a novelist. I couldn't have written it before because it's about all the things that I'm sort of in the middle of. It's about being an adult child of an aging parent. It's about being a parent. It's about being pregnant. It's about transitions in life that I hadn't gotten to. And there's even an independent bookseller lurking in the background because I kind of couldn't help it. But more than any of those things, as Sarah said, All Adults Here is really about making mistakes. My fellow writer, bookseller, friend, goddess, Ann Patchett likes to talk about how all of her books are the same underneath if you sort of like scratch off the particulars. And I think if that's true of my books, which if it's good enough for Ann, it's definitely good enough for me. The truth of my books is that people make mistakes and then people hold on to those mistakes forever, and that truth is present even when people continue to grow and evolve, that people are never done, but that doesn't mean that we don't all have these little nuggets of things in the very back of your brain that you just think about every day, even though you don't necessarily want to. I interviewed Elizabeth Straub recently for Olive Again, which I thought was perfect. Agree? Perfect, yes, okay. And she said, describing Olive as an older person, that you either get bigger or you get bitter. And I thought, oh, that's it. My family is really my novel is about a family who are all trying to get bigger in their own ways and sometimes failing and getting bitter in the process. So in short, the book is not about cheese. There is a cheesemaker and there are a few scenes with goats, but the book is not about cheese. It's about being a part of a family, recovering from bad decisions, and trying to make amends. It's about sex and love and what relationships feel like from the inside and why we need each other. It's about living life under the watchful eyes of your neighbors, who are sometimes people who have known you for a very, very long time. It's about grudges that you hold for so long that you forget why they were there in the first place. It's about siblings and children, and someone dies in the first sentence. It's funny and sad and optimistic. What's funny is that, like, in thinking about this, okay, I don't want to give spoilers, but we are in the Jane Austen room right now. And I do, like, sometimes when I think about this book, I feel like it has some depths of sort of regret and sadness, I think, that are darker than my last two books. But then I just can't help myself. I'm not going to tell you what happens in the end, but we're in the Jane Austen room. So if you've read Jane Austen books and you know how they sometimes end, I'm just saying that. Okay. The last thing I want to say, though, is not about the book, but what about the last 2 years, 2.5 years have meant to me. Owning Books Are Magic has been by far the hardest, most exhausting, and most rewarding challenge of my life. When I'm at the playground now or at a restaurant in the neighborhood, parents will routinely point me out to their children and say something like, "It's the bookstore lady," or "It's the lady who owns the bookstore," which makes me feel like a very nice puppet on Mr. Rogers, like a benevolent and comforting character in their family story. And I imagine that this is how librarians often feel too, particularly children's librarians, I would imagine. We've now been open long enough that the children who were in utero when we opened are now walking and talking. And my older child, who was 3 when we opened, can now read and consumes books. I mean, he always consumed books, but now he eats books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and sleeps literally with books surrounding his body. And so I just want to thank all of you truly from the bottom of my heart for what you do connecting readers to books every day. It is the most profound connection, and it makes such a difference. And I'm so grateful to be amongst you. Thank you so much.